And it is quite funny, really, our interaction, because he said to me, they work. And I said, look, if a professor of physics from the University of Oxford comes to see you and shows you a bit of technology, it'll work, which, as we know, is not necessarily true. But he then said, how come someone clever hasn't done this before? And I said, well, actually, the history of fluid-filled variable power lenses is rather long. It goes back to at least to the work of Grumert in 1747, an instrument maker in Dresden, and there was a rather nice variable focus fluid-filled lens spectacle-like device made in 1879 in Paris by Dr. Cusco. But then we continued our little dialogue in his office, and he said, I think this could be important, and I will help you trial it. And I said, can you pay for the trials? And he said, no, we have no money, but your government will pay for a trial. And so this was in 96, January 96. So I actually came to Oxford. I wrote a letter to the Overseas Aid Minister, Baroness Chalker, and I told her I'd been to see Tiller Falls. He also wrote to me somewhere. I have a note. He confirmed that he thought that the technology should be tried. He actually suggested a few countries in which it could be tried, in fact, first on his list was Ghana. He suggested we should try the procedure, if you like, and the device in Ghana. And so I came back and I talked to, I wrote to Baroness Chalker, and to my surprise, I got a telephone call from the head of health and population at our aid agency, which was at that time called the ODA, Overseas Development Administration, but is now called DFID, Department for International Development, unless they've changed the name again. But I got this call from their head of health, Dr. David Nabarro. And David left a message on my mobile phone saying, I know what you're doing, and I'm going to help you with a minimum of bureaucracy. And David Nabarro was instrumental in, before he moved on first to the WHO and now to the UN in New York. And David was instrumental in getting support from the UK government to start trials. And what we did was we produced in early '96. We produced a device, and this is an example. I had 4 of these made. They have fluid-filled variable power lenses in them, and you can connect them up to a syringe, and you can pump the fluid in or out, and you can sort of put them on, and you change the power. And this was my first. They don't fit me very well, but whoops. Okay, that's my. This is still set. It's rather wonderful. These were made in 1996. They were set to correct my vision, and they still work for me, which is something I haven't tried, as you can see, in some long while. 4 of these were made. They were taken to Africa, and we ran a little trial paid for by the British government to see whether this approach would work. And the results are very encouraging. It was a small trial, but the results are very encouraging. They were written up later for publication and published. And they sort of showed that the small number, we only studied a very small number of subjects. One of them in particular stays in my mind. Well, a number of them do actually. But there was a gentleman by the name of Henry Ajay Mensah, who was the first man to, wear these glasses for routine use. they weren't designed for routine use. I'll tell you that story separately. But he was the first man to wear them in Ghana, and this was in August 1996. And in fact, that little trial was filmed for the BBC, and the film still exists somewhere, and it shows Henry trying his glasses for the first time. And the reason it sticks in my mind is that he's a very charming man who had become presbyopic, which means that he couldn't focus close up, and he was the tailor in this village, Mayera, and so he couldn't really work anymore because he couldn't see to sew. And we put these on and adjusted them, and he beamed because he could then see, and he just started working. And in fact, the interesting story was that at that time I knew very little about how to conduct a trial. I am an atomic physicist and had been trained in these things, so I sort of devised my own procedure for the trial. And I thought, well, we'll try them out, see if they work, and then take them away. And I realised something. I realised that I'd given Henry the power to see and to work, and I couldn't take the eyeglasses away from him. I realised that on the spot, so I left them I asked Georgia Fenyo, who is a government optometrist who worked with us in that little trial, whether he would liaise with Henry and make sure that they worked. And Henry wore them for about 6 months. They were never These were never designed to be worn long term and durable. And after 6 months, we gave him a conventional pair of glasses and took them back. And in fact, Henry's pair, which is essentially identical to these, is now in the Science Museum in London as part of the National Collection, as the first example of this technology which was actually worn in Africa. So that phase of so we'd done some trialing and shown that the approach worked with a prototype device, and so the next stage was to do bigger trials. And so also I was working at that time with a very close friend, Michael Wills. Michael, who has worked in the aid sector essentially most of his life, he was in a dialogue with the Ghana government, and there was a realization that this technology could be, well, we should trial it more, which we did, but also that we could apply it to solve a particular problem. So we ran more trials in 4 countries, and if you look on our website, cvdw.org, you'll find the published results of all these trials. And what we did was to create another device. Let me find a Ghana one here. Yeah, here we are. This was, you see, this prototype, which was only made in 4 examples, then led to this thing, which was used for clinical trials, but it's also essentially wearable. The idea behind this is, I'll just run through what you do. So if you, I'll follow the correct protocol. So with this device as designed, you put it on, you have it so that it's technically, you say that your vision is fogged, keep both eyes open, you adjust the lens on one eye until you've got clear vision, you then adjust the lens on the other eye until you've got clear vision, and at that point you do up these screws and you cut through these tubes and you pull off the adjusters, and you end up with a pair of glasses which have been made. Let me just a moment. I will just go and get my glasses, which are in my jacket. There we are. So you end up with a pair of glasses which you made to your refraction, and which you can wear. And so this is a pair which I always have with me, and I wear them, and they correct my vision perfectly.